Well, hello again. Today we're going to talk about whether or not government officials appointed, elected, or those elected to committees or boards that are supposed to represent you, the people, do they truly represent every cause that we have? Or is it really about money, power, and influence? Come on back and we'll talk about it. Well, thank you for coming back. Listen, we're going to talk a little bit today about really two things. One, we're going to go over some of the topics of this Safer Committee Task Force that the City of Mobile has put together. And I've had a few people reach out to me, and I think they took some issues with something that I said, and I think it's important that we cover it. So let's understand something. One thing, really, what this podcast is about the intersection of where politics, religion, and how those things really do play an effect on our everyday lives when we come to those crossroads in life, especially social issues. That we all have a different opinion, we all have a different perspective about, and those things really are important. And how do we mesh that together? You know, I've heard often in my life they say, well, there's two things you don't talk about in public. You don't talk about religion, and you certainly don't talk about politics. My opinion is that's hogwash. Those are the two main things that really affect our everyday life, whether we want to admit that or not. You know, the idea of conversation really is to influence or persuade people to go along with our opinions, our perspectives, or what we think is right and wrong. People do it all the time. Unfortunately, it's people in the faith world that decide they're going to take a back seat. And I think some of that is probably true and correct when it comes to we're not going to argue what our beliefs are. But I've long said a long time ago, when we start arguing and stop reasoning our positions, then we've already lost the battle. We don't argue about what our faith is. If we truly believe um, in a deity and God and Jesus or whoever it is that you take up your cause and your beliefs on. There's no reason to argue it because you believe in those things. And I am a firm believer that we should also learn and get back to some of this decorum that we should have as statesmen, and that we can agree to disagree. But one of the things that I said, and we're gonna go over it, and I'll just show it to you real quick. I'd made a statement in the last podcast about some of those that I have seen over the years that are involved in some of these mentorship programs. And if you look at the word mentor, what does it mean? The abbreviated definition is simply this: is to elevate one's personal growth or their professional growth. That's what mentorship is. So keep that in mind. And I know we live in a politically charged society where everybody kind of just makes up the definitions or makes up new meanings for what words are, but words really do matter. And that's what mentorship really means: is to elevate the personal growth or the professional growth of an individual. And so, as we were talking about the new committee that the City of Mobile is implementing, called the Safer Committee, I'd made some statements that there were some good people on that board, some new faces on the board that I incidentally knew, and I think they bring a different perspective, and I hope they do bring a different perspective. But we also need to understand that what is really the goal of these boards, and the goal of all these boards that you've seen, public safety committees of some sort, is to bridge that divide between the community and law enforcement, or the city or the county government, whichever one is applicable. And understand that it bridges, right? And so we have to understand, as a government body, what is it that we are trying to do. If we don't understand what we're trying to do, then we can't expect the public to buy into what we're trying to do. And I think that was the big takeaway that I seen from the Safer Committee, from the public safety director, was, we're learning. We're trying to figure out what the problems are, where the problems are. And incidentally, in various roles, that individual has played a specific role with strategic initiatives with the Mobile Police Department, the community, with the City of Mobile. And so after 10 years, what models are we using? I know that we tried to implement a program last year, and we were going to bring all these resources to the table. And it seems like every other year, every 3 or 4 years, we're saying the same things over and over. And my argument is, are we really being serious about what the end goal is? So what is the end goal? The end goal for even working within the community is, it's not a welfare program, or it shouldn't be. It's not a program where we're only giving resources to people that we feel are indigent. And while that plays a role, the end goal is that we know that those that commit the crimes, at least in our community here in Mobile, and it can be said for Mobile County, that those that contribute mostly to the crime are between the ages of 15 and 25 years of age. That is both for victims and or offenders. And so what that tells us, that if the vast majority of those individuals between those demographic age groups If they are the ones committing the crime, then that means that we have to solve that problem. And how do you do that? And I do agree that we have to be able to give some resources, maybe to the parents or maybe to the young folks in our community, and teach them skills in the way of conflict resolution. Teach them things on how to behave and how to obey authority. And we take for granted, if we grew up in a home that was very structured, we take for granted a lot of times that, because we did it, that everybody else should do it. And I've always said that people are only, it doesn't matter who the people are, the people are only products of the environment in which they grow up. And by the time some of these young folks, in particular men, they grow up without fathers. And we're not saying, oh, listen, I grew up in a fatherless home, but I had a lot of love, faith, and discipline, and a strong granddaddy that was in my life. And we take those things for granted. Am I the exception to the rule? Absolutely. But conversely, there are young men that are committing crimes too that are from really good homes, and for whatever reason they become addicted to drugs or alcohol. They go down, that rabbit hole of life sometimes, and they had every opportunity not to do that. So we're only talking about how do we affect that change when it comes to crime. And there are the exceptions to every rule, okay? And so I'd made a comment, and I think it's best if I just show you the tape, and we'll roll it back now. But my argument is why do we take a DJ that's 50 years old, that still dresses like he's 15 years old, and then go into the school system and then be a mentor to some of the kids that really don't even understand? They're looking at a 50-year-old man like, why are you dressed this way? You're not appealing to them children. So as you can see, I think some of my good friends of mine called and said, well, look, appearance really doesn't matter. Age doesn't matter. What matters is the heart of the person that's involved in trying to mentor these children. And I agree with that. And so a lot of times, when you got 20, 30, 40 minutes, I don't want this podcast to be 2 hours long, right? Because who's going to watch it? But 20, 30 minutes is enough for somebody to digest. So really the goal for me was simply this. The goal was to get information out there that appeals to most reasonable people that would understand really then if the end goal is to reduce crime by affecting the change between the offenders and victims in our community that are either dying or perpetrating the crimes, those ages are between 15 and 25. So that means we really need to start maybe in the middle school, maybe even in the elementary school with some of these programs. And are the programs needed? Yes, they are needed. I didn't have to have a program coming up, but the programs are needed because, again, there are some children that just does not have access to good home care, to good discipline structure. And when we talk about discipline, we're not talking about discipline in the way of corporal punishment. We're talking about being fed routinely. We're talking about the emotional needs being met, the physical, the mental needs of that child being met, making sure the child's hygienes are being met, getting a good night's sleep, getting them up in time to be able to get to school and prepare for their day. Whether we realize what we're doing or not, we are training those children for success in the future. Because if we teach them early, well, they learn. They learn as a pattern of behavior that this is going to be successful. This is going to work for me. And so while some folks may have taken that an offense to what I said, the offense was not meant to be as such. What it was meant to say is that if we're going to take mentorship and remembering what it really means is to elevate the personal and professional growth of an individual, that's exactly what we're trying to do. And I think maybe it's best said this way, sometimes like DJs or people that are in the entertainment world, that's how they dress. Does it make them stupid? No, absolutely not. Some of them are very, very smart. They've learned to capitalize and make money, certainly a living on that. But let's talk about social norms. It's no different than an athlete of any sort. What are the odds of the young men in our country that's actually going to make it to the professional level? Very, very few. And we understand that, certainly athletes and the entertainment industry are a big influence, especially on the younger generation. It always has been, and it always will be. But it was no different than when I was growing up. I know you're going to look at me and you're going to say, well, how did you grow up? Well, I grew up in Pritchard, Alabama. I grew up listening to NWA and, some of these other Two Live Crew bands, But you know what I couldn't do? I could not take that into my home. That was where the line was drawn. And my mother didn't have to tell me not to do it. I instinctively knew it because of the type raising that was in the home. So understand, if we're trying to elevate, all I was simply saying was this. Understanding that regardless of who the people are, I don't care if folks are tatted up. I know sometimes, there's a stigma with people that have tattoos, and I'll use that as an example. Some of the best people I know are tatted, from head to toe, and they're very smart people. But that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if we're going to change the culture of the young children in our community to be successful, we have to teach them to operate in a normal society. You say, well, what's normal? Well, yeah, you can be tatted up. Well, you could be a DJ and, be 50 years old and dress like a 15-year-old. Understanding, though, everybody's not going to be that DJ that's going to be successful. Everybody's not going to be that professional athlete. And if our children does not understand how to operate in a world that is not the exception, because the world is not the exception. The entertainment industry is the exception. The athletes that go along with that program, or DJs, all those are exceptions. But all of our children are not going to be DJs. They're not all going to be entertainers. They're not going to all be pro athletes, right? Because we understand the margins are very small. So why don't we teach our children what is expected of them to succeed in today's society? Somebody sent me a video one time that said Elon Musk, doesn't even wear a suit or a tie to his board meetings. Well, he's a billionaire. Now, I don't really know how well he got there, but once you become in charge of that, it's no different than the entertainers or the athletes or even the DJs. When they reach a certain professional level, they can do the things that the average, normal, everyday citizen can't do, and I'll prove my point. Why don't you dress like a rock star or a hip-hop star and then go down here to Austin and apply for a job and let me know how that works out for you? That's exactly my point. So while those are the exceptions, the real world is not the exception, and we have to teach our children how to operate in that world should they not be the DJ, should they not be the professional athlete or the entertainer, because we know the odds are stacked against anybody that tries to go into those type of fields. I mean, you got to have a really, really special talent. And so I just think that it's unfair and it's disingenuous to our children when we don't put people in front of them that look like them, that are professional, successful, businessmen, women, and those things are really important to me. Listen, they don't, as a lawman for 30 years, it doesn't matter whose children they are. The same advice I give to my own children is the same advice I would give to your children, because I know what works. Absolutely know what works. And one of the individuals that called me, I have a lot of respect for this person. And this person said, well, the preacher's always right. We have to meet the people where they are. And I get what this person was saying, but meeting people with where they are is not dressing like them, talking or acting like them, if we know that's not going to help them be successful anywhere. Going and meeting the sinner in that scenario, we meet them where they are just simply means that we're not going to be judgmental, because we once were a sinner. We're not going to be judgmental in the way of how you look, your appearance, or whatever the case may be. But even then, a person that may come to church at some point, if they have that true relationship with God, their lifestyle will change. And so I just wanted to put a little bit of that in the context that at the end of the day, the only advice I'm going to give to you or your children is the same advice I apply to myself and certainly to my family. And I just believe that, addressing youth violence is not the end of all. It's not the silver lining that's going to correct all of our problems. We have a host of problems. Mental issues are huge in every community, and that's more of a state and federal problem because there's no money being allocated to such things. But understand, we all want what's best. And I'm not castigating any dispersions on any of the people on the committee. I'm just simply saying I'm just tired of seeing the same committees doing the same thing, largely with the same people on it, and expect a different result. That's insanity. And why we continue to do it and use taxpayer monies, whether we call it a grant or money that's allocated, it's taxpayer money. It really is. And I want to see the success. And the only way we can do it certainly is faith. But we understand as a government, we can't put faith back into the home. The government has no control or authority to do that. But what we can do is recognize those that are underprivileged, those that come from that poverty mindset or that poverty background that I was telling you about in the last episode, and help direct all of our kids, not just in the city of Mobile. Listen, the county, you may think the city has its own problems, but it's not. The same problems are in the county as well. And my commitment to you in running for sheriff is to find the right program that helps elevate these children personally and professionally, but largely that has to do with workforce development, trying to find placement for our community and our children and the people in our local area, because if they're successful, not only will they be successful, but the idea and hopefully the goal would be is that their future generations and offspring will not go into that life of crime and will outrun poverty in many regards like you and I did. So hopefully that put us to rest. But listen, I appreciate the challenge because we don't always get to go into detail because of the time constraints on this. And so I do think it's important. And thank you so much for those that did reach out to me. It wasn't personal. At the end of the day, for me, it's about saying how do we find a way for our children to operate in a world that they are going to be exposed to. The world 30 years ago is not the world today, especially when it comes to technology. And our children, unfortunately, in our community, in my opinion, not only in the city of Mobile, but certainly in the county of Mobile, are underserved, underprivileged, and it is up to the leaders to find that pathway forward so that we give them hope, their families hope, and not just for the affluent in our community. So let's agree to disagree. And, I love you guys on that. But at the end of the day, the children's lives are really at stake here. And we've got to find real solutions, real programs. We can't save the world. We can't save the country. We can't even save the state. But Mobile County is not that big. We can certainly make a dent in saving lives and changing the course of what public safety looks like in the county of Mobile. That being said, we're going to talk a little bit about MAWSS. So it looks like there are a couple of individuals that come forward, and they have filed a suit against MAWSS, the Mobile Area Water Board Sewer System. And I'm not sure if you guys have been tracking on this or not, but a lot of it has to do with the lake, Big Creek Lake, as we know it, has been shut down. And it's been shut down to recreational use. It's been shut down to anybody that wants to fish or do anything in the lake. And this is kind of the first time. And of course, we now know that the committee that runs MAWSS, those committee board members are elected by Mobile City Council people. And of course, there's an executive director. I believe his name is Bud McCovery or McCory. I think it's McCory. And I don't know the man, but nonetheless, so there's just been this big battle brewing between the community and some folks that live out in the Tanner Williams and Sims area around Big Creek Lake that have used that for generations of fishing, recreational use, not only for themselves, but maybe their kids, grandkids, and so on. And I think the group is called Take Back Big Creek Lake. And so, a little bit of what I know about it, it was, addressed on the campaign for running for mayor as a candidate. I think virtually everybody was asked, what is the problem? Why are we here? And I think there were a series of maybe some questions with the state attorney general or a complaint, maybe. And so I think the best thing to do at this point is let's just go to the lawsuit and we'll read it, and then we'll continue to talk a little bit about that if we can. Like the suit was filed this week on December the 23rd. And as we go through it, I'm not going to read the entire suit, but mainly as you read the suit, it just talks about the plaintiffs who lives near Big Creek Lake is adversely affected by the vacation in question. So it looks like maybe this suit is not necessarily as to whether or not they're opening the lake, but I guess by the proxy of portions of Howes Ferry Road being closed, it essentially closed off the lake. And then, of course, MAWSS is saying that no one can access it. And I believe there's an incident now where a young man is being charged criminally for going on to the waterway, and that's another issue maybe we'll talk about on the podcast. But I'm not going to read the entire suit. I think it's just best to go through. I've kind of highlighted some things in here. But when you start reading the suit, it says, most, if not all, the water used by MAWSS comes from the JB Converse Reservoir, also known as Big Creek Lake, which is owned by the Alabama Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, otherwise the state of Alabama. It says this action concerns the invalid vacation of a portion of Howes Ferry Road. Howes Ferry Road to access Big Creek Lake for recreational purposes until it was unlawfully closed or permanently closed by MAWSS on February the 4th, 2025. And then, of course, on February the 7th of 2022, MAWSS, through its director, Bud McCrory, executed the declaration of vacation of a portion of Howes Ferry Road. In other words, it's known as the declaration. And that declaration, according to the suit, is inaccurate. It was filed under the wrong vacation statute with the state of Alabama. And of course, the suit is claiming that that vacation of Howes Ferry Road is certainly void. And then it goes on to say that Mobile County still owns the portion of Howes Ferry Road, which is the public boat landing area known as Fox Landing. Only public access to Big Creek Lake. It has now been cut off and closed by the invalid vacation portions of Howes Ferry Road, and the vacation denies the plaintiffs access to Big Creek Lake. So while really it appears that what the suit is saying, in my opinion, based on what I'm reading, and I have no personal connection with this at all, but other than what I'm reading, is that the big issue is to open the lake. But I think the suit is taking issue that the roadway, which is a county maintained roadway to the lake, which is Howes Ferry Road, the suit is trying to make an argument that it does not belong to Big Creek Lake, as they suggested, due to this declaration. And then, of course, the suit just goes on to say that the first fatal flaw in the vacation of Howes Ferry Road in question is that MAWSS and Mobile County follow the wrong vacation statute. And then, of course, it gives the statute set forth following procedural requirements that were ignored and followed by the defendants prior to the vacation of Howes Ferry Road. And it goes on in to say that there are a couple of bullet points, and I think it's worth reading, but I'll just do it in brevity. Notice of the hearing shall be made public according to Alabama code during a statute. The claim is no such notice was provided. It says a copy should be served to the abutting landowners at least 30 days prior to the hearing. And I believe it goes on to say Mobile County owns the right of way of House Ferry Road abutting Big Creek Lake, but MAWSS misrepresented to Mobile County that it owned this property. And Mobile's county resolution did not state that it is in the interest of the public to vacate such street, alley, and highway. So what it's outlined is saying that there were procedural matters that were not met as a condition of trying to vacate this roadway, if you will. And it goes on to say Commissioner Hudson is the county commissioner for District 2. She was required by statute to introduce MAWSS's declaration, I guess because it falls within her district. But it stated on or about February 24, 2022, Ms. Hudson was not present at that county commissioner meeting. And of course, Commissioners Dewitt and Ludgood introduced the legislation, of course, seconded, and then it looks like it was approved and adopted as the declaration. And then it goes on a little bit and to say that the notice of the governing body shall be published once in the newspaper. They didn't follow the procedures on that according to the date when the resolution was filed. And then there's some other things to go, but it really goes in good. But the point in getting into this, and then of course I'll just read what the plaintiff's count one declaration judgment in brevity just says that they're looking for a justifiable or correction. They're saying that plaintiffs adopt and reallege the allegations set forth in this complaint, and that it's a justifiable dispute between the parties making this action right for a declaratory judgment, and that essentially what they're looking for is Halls Ferry Road to be open, thus will open up Big Creek Lake back to the public. So it looks to me that the attorneys for the complaint have done their job, but of course it has to go before a judge, and the judge has to determine whether or not there's any merit in it, certainly. And a declaration of judgment is really asking the judge to look at all the circumstances, the facts that's been presented, and to make an adjudication or an award based on the information and the facts that were set forth. So we say, do our government representatives or elected officials or appointees, are they truly doing what's in the best interest of you and me, the people that they serve? And I argue, and many times I think a lot of times people really go into government trying to do the right thing, but then once they get in there, they realize that the money, power, influence that they know is there is more problematic for them once they get in there. It reminds me, if you'll remember, and I went to school in the 70s and 80s, and I think this whole groupthink protocol started, or curriculum started in schools, and I'm sure they've been doing it for 35, 38 years by now. And I think there's some good things that come out of groupthink, right? Because it challenges everybody that's in that group to think big and to come up with ideas, not just from one person. But invariably what I find with that type of curriculum is that usually you take a group of 10, and there's usually one or two people that'll take charge of that group, and then everybody else just kind of lays back. They don't want no part in it, and whatever the one or two people that are leading the group decide, everybody gives their stamp of approval. And I've seen that a lot of times in not only the federal elections or government, state government, but all the way down to the local government, which affects us the most. And that's that these leaders get on these boards and they appoint people to boards, and people just kind of go along with the program because they want to stay on the board. They don't want to seem to be adversarial. They don't want to be seen as the person that's constantly fighting them. But we live in a world today, my friends, where a lot of things and ethical issues and morality is being questioned. If we ever need a strong leadership, that leadership is today. And this idea that we're going to just go along to get along, that's not valid. When the people of any community elect its people or person to represent them in some capacity, that official has an obligation to those voters, those constituents they serve, to do what's right by them in the best interest of that district, that community, the county, whatever the case may be. And we just simply don't do that. And I don't think that a lot of these elected officials maybe even realize they're doing it, or maybe they do. Certainly they do. But you can't constantly go to the table. I've always said this. If your local governing board is always fighting, there's a problem. That means nobody's reasoning. Nobody's trying to find real solutions that benefit their constituents. And we shouldn't always be fighting. But if we also conversely find that the board is always getting along, that has to be problematic, because there is no one solution that addresses every area of a community's needs, right? So if we come up with, annexation, for example, well, it may benefit one group of people, but it may not benefit the whole. And so what leaders really have to look at and say, well, what benefits the whole as the whole? So where do I get more bang for my buck, knowing that everybody's not going to be happy, but then be able to take that reasoning back to your constituents and say, this is why I'm voting the way I'm voting, and not just unilaterally make decisions. Yes, you were elected to go to to whatever seat or position you did, but not unilaterally make a decision without going back to its people and saying, this is the reason I'm doing what I'm doing, understanding that you may even get pushback from the people, but it is your job as an elected official to go back to that community and to explain and articulate why you're getting more bang for your buck with this position that you're taking, whether it's annexation or any other issue. And our leaders are not doing that. I always got along really well with Councilman Fred Richardson with the city of Mobile, and he could be adversarial at sometimes. And of course, he didn't ask for this, but I'm gonna give him a plug on it. He would, I called him the greatest showman on earth, right? Because in a meeting or a community meeting, he'd be talking the police up or whatever. But then when he went out to the cameras, he'd have something else say because he was giving a rally cry to his people. But what he would say was not inherently wrong. It's different if you go out and it's wrong. And so, but you can never question whether he was right or wrong on an issue. You can never question where he stood on an issue in his community affecting his district. Maybe you agreed, maybe you didn't. A lot of people called him a loudmouth. A lot of people say, he's just being adversarial. But then if you look at some of the bigger issues, the economical issues that he went with and he passed, to me, I watch people what they do. I could care less what people say. I've learned a long time ago. People talk a lot, but what they do is really who they are and what they mean that they are, and that's important. And so as I watched all the council, I didn't find a person. Conversely, you could take another person. There were many on the city council for Mobile that, man, they were in lock and step with the last administration. I don't think they ever questioned anything. And that was somebody, in my opinion, that was an appeaser. They just go along to get along. They want to stay on the board. The administration likes them because we can get what we want. Listen, they're not pandering to that particular leader because they think, they're great leaders. They're pandering to that leader because they know that leader wants to stay on that seat. And that's problematic, but the leader don't take it as that. They think that they're playing a big role and a big part in this overall big conglomerate of laws and regulations that are passed and things that we're doing, but they're not really fighting for the constituents, nor do they go to the community and tell their constituents really what the issues are with a particular bill, a particular problem, or anything that that district is facing. And I think that's problematic, but we find that everywhere. It's not just here locally. This is why today, if it was ever important, we need strong leadership, my friends. We see this suit. This suit should have never came about, and now you got people spending their own money, having to take a government entity to court, and that's what courts are for. Courts are to remedy a dispute between parties. That's essentially what courts are. But we shouldn't have to force citizens to spend their own money for litigation when that is the whole point of having elected officials that serve in those districts that can reach out to these board members and find out truthfully what's going on. I think when you look at MAWSS, I think the bigger issue is we don't know what's going on. They tell us it's about these organisms and all, and they're trying to preserve the lake. But my understanding, they haven't produced anything. They've not produced any real studies that said this is the reason why we need to do it. And then when you're not truthful with the public and you're not transparent with the public, it allows the door to be open for all these people to come out and these conspiracies and ideas and things. And then everybody says, well, you're a conspiracy theorist. Well, what did you do as the elected official, the governing body, the people that should have the answers? What did you do to put to rest all those conspiracies or thought processes that people are running with? And then there's no reason why the lake really was closed based on my understanding. Now, I'm not the judge. It's not going to be up to me whether or not the lake or House Ferry Road is open, but you get the general point of what I'm talking about. Listen, we got a lot of problems. At the end of the day, these problems don't go away. That is the important of the election process. I'm asking you to go to the Secretary of State webpage for the state of Alabama. It takes all of about 3 minutes. Click the election tabs and then just register to vote. And when you put your address in, it'll send your information to the local registrar. The local registrar in Mobile County will send you a card saying when and where and who you can vote for when it's that time. It's an easy process, takes all of about 3 minutes. Listen, one of the greatest privileges we have in this country is that we can vote for the people that represent us. And we, the people, if we will show up in numbers to vote, we can overcome any amount of election interference that would be taking place, if it is taking place. But we have to do our part and show up and, I've heard it. Well, it doesn't matter. They're going to do what they want to do. Well, yeah, they are. But we don't tuck our head down. We don't take our ball and go home. It's always a matter of good versus evil in society. It doesn't matter what society is. And I've seen it. I've seen police officers. I've seen those at the highest level of government turn a blind eye to corruption, turned a blind eye to things that are unethical or even improper. They may not be corruption, it may not be unethical, but it's just improper and it's not doing right by the people because it's self-serving the leader that's sitting in office. Do your part. Go register to vote. Join me May 19th. I'm asking for your vote, by the way, for sheriff of Mobile County. Everything I told you, I would certainly be transparent. And, look at it from this perspective. How many political candidates or how many politicians that are serving in office does a podcast where they can come straight to you? Listen, this is a recording that will be held and used against me on anything I do in life later. But I'm that confident because I am that person, and my past actions show just the type of man that I am, a man of character, a man of integrity. And how do you know what I'm going to do in the future? Well, past performance has to be indicative of what I'm going to do in the future. And you've seen that I can't be bought. I can't be intimidated. I'm going to always do right, my friends, by you. Doesn't matter who you like. Doesn't matter at all. That is part of our problem in this country. Well, I like this person or I like that person. Well, if you don't know those people personally, you're only liking what you think their public reputation is without any regards to really the functions or the quality of work they do while sitting in that office. And I get it. A lot of people don't want to sit down and talk about politics, but it is one of the biggest things, short of us aligning our faith up with the good Lord. It is one of the most important things we can do in a society to hold our leaders accountable. You send them to office with that power, money, and influence, and they get paid very well to sit on these boards, to sit on these positions, to represent you. I don't take that lightly. Again, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to come and talk with you today. I want it to be understood that on this podcast, we're not going to denigrate anybody, but we can challenge people's records. We can challenge what people do when they vote, these leaders, and we can ask questions that's going to generate questions from you and me, the voter. I'm no different than you now. I'm a public citizen, and I have a lot of concerns and reservations about what's being done because I've seen what goes on behind the veil, goes on behind the curtain. And it doesn't mean that everybody's actions are nefarious, but we have an obligation as the people to uphold the rule of law. And the only way you can do it as a people is to vote. And then if you vote for someone and you don't like how they do or all the things that they're doing and you don't think they should be doing, well, 4 years will come around, you can vote for somebody else in that time. And as I always say, God bless. And if the creek don't rise, we'll see you again on the next episode.